90s and the beginning of the 21st century will also be remembered as a time of a deeply contested culture and a strongly divided American society. Civil rights, the role of women, religion, sex, violence have all transformed our culture. The battleground of this culture war has been women's rights. The Equal Rights Amendment, which is a constitutional amendment that would have guaranteed equal protection and due process against discrimination based on gender, like the 14th had done for race, will be narrowly defeated by a conservative backlash. It passes Congress, and it falls one state short of getting the requisite number of states. And in fact, some states had given their approval and then retracted it in the face of this conservative backlash. Abortion, of course, is probably the most high-profile issue when it comes to women's rights, and it's made for some strange bedfellows. Catholics, Mormons, and fundamentalist Christians, not groups that typically agree and get along, all are strong voices, and I should say the organized Catholic Church. Most Catholics, in fact, support a woman's right to choose. But anyway, the organizational structures of these three religious groups have come together to provide enormous amount of funding and energy and support for the pro-life cause. Of course, there's also just a simple conservative movement that feels like expansion of women's rights will destroy the family unit. You do still hear people coming on TV, even here in 2013, talking about how if women achieve some degree of equality, then no longer will they stay home and the family unit will fall apart. There's been some energy on the right for a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, but this has never really gotten anywhere. It's never gotten out of the House or the Senate, much less received much support in the state. One way anti-abortion activists have had success is by attacking the funding for abortion. Many states have banned any sort of state funding that might go to abortion services, and the Hyde Amendment at the congressional level, at the federal level, prevents any federal money from going to any abortion. And in fact, there is so much kind of support to be gained among those who are highly activated on this issue that conservatives in Congress will just repeatedly pass versions of the Hyde Amendment. There's dozens of these things that have been passed saying no federal money to abortion. Of course, it's also been the cause of terrorism and violence. There has been a significant degree of anti-abortion or pro-life, perhaps, terrorism, including Eric Rudolph, who I talked about earlier, who was blowing up abortion clinics. Dr. George Tiller, the guy over there in green on the left, was shot by the guy below him and killed. Scott Roeder, that was actually the second time Dr. Tiller had been shot. He had been shot in both arms earlier by a different pro-life terrorist. But this has been a very controversial and very dangerous issue. One result of this has been that conservatives, Republicans, now virtually all of their appointments are Catholics, which is strange because Catholics traditionally have been a Democratic constituency. But by appointing a Catholic to the Supreme Court, a conservative is kind of winking at his followers and saying, look, I'm putting somebody who's going to be against abortion on the court. In fact, today there's not a single Protestant on the court. The entire Supreme Court now is either Catholic or Jewish. Environmentalists have had intermittent success at the federal level, but they usually win at the local level. We had the Love Canal episode, which is where a neighborhood, I believe it was in Pennsylvania, found itself being polluted by a factory down the way, and it was causing high rates of cancer. And so the people in the neighborhood, when investigators from the factory came out to check this out, they kidnapped. They captured the investigators from the factory and threatened to force them to drink the water that they were having to drink. And the corporation who was doing all this polluting was forced to back down. Here where I live in Austin, we've had a huge fight over a place called Barton Springs where this endangered salamander lives. And that's been a major political battle. But it's also they've been very effective at preventing development in certain parts of the city. Of course, our climate is changing. There's debate. 99% of scientists say this is being caused by man and things like increased pollution and stuff like this. And a very small group of scientists funded by the people who are accused of doing the polluting say it's not caused by man. But if you believe in science at all, it does appear to be. But what nobody can argue is that the global temperature is rising. In fact, former Vice President Al Gore will win the Nobel Prize in 2007 for his documentary highlighting this issue, although that documentary has come under attack. Politically, America has really largely refused to go along with global efforts to fight climate change. Or in 1997, for example, Republicans refused to ratify the Clinton administration's signing of the Kyoto Treaty to reduce pollution. And this still continues to be a major issue with enormous amounts of energy on the activist side, trying to prevent global warming, and enormous amounts of money on the corporate side. Of course, the regulations would affect them and cut into their profit margins. And so this is the fight today. 21st century, of course, is the age of globalization. That's the name of the chapter, after all. And that's good and bad. So let's look at the opposition to what Bush called the New World Order, the first Bush. The left opposes the increased use of our military for economic reasons. And you might think here about Iraq, which we pretty clearly seem to have gone in because Iraq is an oil-rich country. The right is actually upset about the use of the military for human rights. Conservatives were very angry about our action in the Balkans and in 1993 when really what started under the George H.W. Bush administration and finished under the Clinton administration, actions in Somalia. And of course, the right is also upset that by working in conjunction with other nations, America is giving up its sovereignty. We are giving up control of ourselves to international organizations like the UN. That's a common criticism from the right. There's also a lot of criticism of free trade, the reduction of trade barriers. This makes labor organizations angry because they claim that it causes jobs, manufacturing jobs, to leave the United States and offshore to other countries. And many consumers are bothered as they are buying their goods from the store and then later learning that those goods are being made in really horrible conditions, slave labor conditions in many cases abroad. Small children making Nikes in Malaysia for 10 or 15 cents an hour. Recently, we've had this epidemic in South Asia of factories that make goods for companies here in America that are burning down, or buildings are collapsing and tons of people are dying, all in the name of making that good at the lowest possible price so you can have the highest possible profit margin. And many Americans today are very concerned and have real moral problems about that. There's also a great concern about the environmental damage. America can regulate its factories all at once, but if most of what we're buying is being made in countries like China or Mexico that do not have strict environmental regulations, the pollution damage is still happening to the world. In fact, down here in Texas, if you go to the border in Juarez or Laredo, you can just watch the pollution float over the border. It's a very real thing. Others are concerned about multinational corporations who may traditionally be an American corporation, like, say, Exxon, but have now headquartered themselves in different places around the world. They've become global corporations, and they no longer have any connection to America, and have become kind of extra-national and are given enormous power and influence in America, but really have no loyalty to America. That's a criticism of multinational corporations often. The World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank have all been targets of those concerned about the effects of globalization. In November of 1999, there were massive protests at the G7 meetings in Seattle, Washington. They were met with significant violence. A number of these pictures are from those protests. And there were more protests in the following months about those who were concerned about America's increasing multinationalism in its policies. The G7 did pledge $1.2 billion to fight AIDS and to meet needs in remote areas in the future as an attempt to kind of improve its image. But still, many Americans, and many of these follow people like Ron Paul, are concerned about these trends, not just in America, but globally.